welcome to another edition of the House Whisperer Show on WWDB Talk 860. I'm Barry Reisman, inviting you to stay tuned for expert advice about maintaining your house from the roof to the basement. And we've got the guy that knows all about it, professional home inspector Jack Milne. Jack, how you doing today?
Great, Barry. It's another Sunday, and I appreciate everyone listening in.
And you've got a special guest today, and why don't you tell our listeners who is with us on the line?
Yeah, actually, I'm very proud to have Phil Getty from Boucher & James, which is an engineering firm from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Welcome aboard there, Phil.
Yeah, hi, Jack. Glad to be here.
Well, our topic today is going to be about underground fuel storage tanks, and all around Philadelphia in the surrounding counties, we're starting to come across homes that have either older or aging underground fuel storage tanks. And, you know, I always think of Levittown and Washington's Crossing and areas up and around Bucks County, as well as the Gwinnett areas where there's quite a few of these storage tanks. So I had spoken to Phil a few weeks ago about coming onto the air and giving him, our listeners, his insight as to what to do and how to test these tanks and to take some precautions about them. But before we kick in, I'd like to thank my sponsors, because without them I wouldn't be on the air. So Bucksmont Inspections, Rob Bowie, if you have any on-site sewage evaluations or concerns, please reach out to him at 215-669-4213. Barrow Exterminating, they're out of Glenolden, Pennsylvania, and for Tri-County, they do the termite and radon testing for us when we're in those lower counties. Their phone number is 610-586-5640. Pest Blaster, Phil Cantor was on the air not too long ago, and we talk radon, mold, wood-storing insects, as well as pest removal. So as it's getting colder out, the critters want to come in. So if you're hearing any unusual sounds, go ahead and give them a buzz at 215-295-5555. BrainFlushGear.com. It's still a little bit, well, we are getting actually close to Christmas here, so it may be a little bit too late to get your Christmas order in, but think about BrainFlushGear.com for the rest of the year. And their contact information is literally contact at BrainFlushGear.com. And, of course, Tri-County Inspection Company. We serve 13 counties in and around Philadelphia, as well as from Hunterdon to Salem County in New Jersey, all within your listening range. So we're at 215-295-2030. Lehigh Valley, 610-346-7880. And in South Jersey, 856-853-4224. Before we kick in with Phil, I just want to jump into the email box real quick. Kim from Princeton. A friend told me about the House Whisperer show, and I listened to the segment on space versus storage, kitchens and closets, and got some great ideas. I'll be definitely passing your name along, as well as your website. Kim, all I can say is thanks for the email. I looked up when that episode actually ran, and it showed on May 31st, 2013. So, wow. But I guess that's why they're archived. So visit thehousewhisperershow.com, and please email me at thehousewhisperershow@gmail.com. So again, today's topics: underground fuel storage tanks with Phil Getty from Boucher & James. Phil, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Well, the best way, the quickest way, is by telephone, I think, at 215-345-9400, and we're in the tri-state area, but located in southern Bucks County, central Bucks County, and we have offices out in Morgantown, Pennsylvania, and up in Stroudsburg as well. But that number, 215-345-9400, is usually the best way to reach me.
So how long does a steel underground fuel storage tank last before it may leak?
Well, that's a problem. They're steel, and therefore they rust. Even though they're painted, these things get scratches, and the paint peels off of them, and there's a rule of thumb, but there's no great study that's been done on these, and it varies so much, but often people think about 15 years is for a tank before it's starts to leak, and realize it's not just the tank, but the tubing that runs from the tank into the house that's made out of copper, and that is not painted. and that can leak as well. So 15 years is the rule of thumb, but I've pulled some out of the ground that have been close to 100 years old, and they look almost brand new. Back then, they made them out of steel that might have been a half-inch thick or so, and some are old railroad tankers that they buried underground. But I've also seen tanks leak in 1 or 2 years if they've been close to an electric line where the electricity leaks from the wiring and causes it to corrode the tank quickly. So 15 years, but be careful because 2 or 3 years and you can still have a problem.
When we have a home that has underground utilities, and we're running from the property line to the right side of the house, but also on the right side of the house is your underground fuel storage tank. That could have that could be detrimental to that tank.
Yeah, I've seen. I think the worst cases are where the tank is close to the ground wire for the house, because if there's any electrical leak in the house and it's bleeding into that ground wire, it sends an electrical current into the ground, and it's that current movement through the ground that really corrodes or just burns a hole through a tank, any scratch in a tank. Now, there's one way to avoid all this is to have a plastic tank or fiberglass tanks. Some of these are now double-walled, and some have cathodic protection on them where it's a bag of metal on the end of the tank that corrodes before the tank does. That helps slow things down, but as long as it's a metal tank, it has the potential. And I tell people it's not a question of will it leak, it's a question of when. And no one can answer that. So it's better to really deal with the tank issue now instead of when it's too late after it's corroded through.
Let me ask you this, Phil. Does soils make a difference? If it's I'm thinking sandy soil versus a fertile soil, farmland versus more towards your beach areas.
Well, it does. That clay is negatively charged, and that allows electricity to flow through it more easily. So the more clay in the soil, the more chance of corrosion for the tanks. So a sandy soil, that sand is just beads of glass, basically, that doesn't allow electricity to flow through it. But you could say sandy soils in southern Jersey, the tanks may last better. The more drained the soil is, where you don't have water in there, that electricity flows through the water, that can help. But every site can be different. It depends what they backfilled it with. Some areas, even in southern Jersey, you can have sand in one spot and clay in another. So I wouldn't use a rule of thumb. And again, okay, maybe you'll get 18 years instead of 15, but who's keeping track of the time when they bury a tank often? They just know it's been down there a long time. And my rule of thumb is when people call here, unless it's a few years old, I tell them, it's time to get it out instead of waiting until they get a phone call from the neighbor that they've got fuel seeping into the neighbor's basement or out into the creek. It's better to be proactive and deal with it now instead of after you've found out about the leak.
Always better proactive than reactive. What types of problems can develop if a tank leaks?
Well, some of the worst are when it gets into someone's neighboring well supply, because what's found in fuel oil is carcinogenic. So there's a concern that people could be drinking a toxin, and therefore they could not only get sick, but you could have somebody that could be knocking on your door and say, I've got cancer, and I found out there's some fuel oil in my water, and we've got some major problems here we're going to have to deal with. So wells are a big worry because they can pull the fuel over into the well, and it's very expensive to replace a well, although you can put filters on them. The other that I see commonly is either the homeowner or a neighbor will get a problem with, they'll get a fuel oil smell in their basement, and the vapors also are toxic and not healthy for you, but they're just so pervasive through a house. Once you get a tiny bit of fuel oil seeping out through a wall, it can really cause a big problem in the comfort of living in a home. The other is that it gets into people's sump pumps, seeps in through the underdrain system of the house, gets in the sump pump, and not only all that is a problem, but then the sump pump discharges it out onto the ground and may pump it over into a creek, and you wind up with fish dead in the stream, or you just get direct seepage out of the ground into the creek, and suddenly they've got booms down in the creek and dead fish, and you're in the newspaper. So all of these things can be problems, and the big problem also to the homeowner is the cost. That these things can range from $5,000 to deal with a small issue to $100,000 to deal with a bigger issue, and then possibly $1 million if you've got a lawsuit from a neighbor saying, I've got cancer and I think it came from your fuel that seeped in.
Holy moly, moly. Let me ask you this. What can I do to minimize the potential for a leak to occur or a homeowner?
You as a building inspector or you as a homeowner?
Well, let's play it as I'm a homeowner.
Okay. But, the reason I brought up the building inspector is that you should be keeping an eye out that some people don't even know they have a tank on their property. So it may turn out that we have an old tank that's sitting in the back that's full of fuels, and you may spot the vent cap.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to just jump in here, gentlemen. This is a good spot to take a break. We've got a little cliffhanger here as far as what to do as a homeowner about fuel tanks. So let's take a break, and we'll come back and we'll get the answer to that question. You're listening to the House Whisperer Show with Jack Milne every week at this time. And our special guest here at WWDB is Phil Getty of Boucher and James. And I think a lot of people, I hope, are paying attention and will take some action. We'll come right back and we'll get the answer to that question. But right now, we have these messages and then more conversation on the House Whisperer Show.
It's a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard.
Boro Exterminating has been specializing in wood-destroying insect inspection and control for over 40 years, serving Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. All inspectors are state certified and ensure providing their clients with professional inspections and treatments. Boro not only performs conventional termite treatments, but also handles special services like historic buildings and homes with wells, creeks, or ponds. The client is assured that all treatments will be performed safely when you hire Boro to do the work. They also provide radon testing in their service area. Boro's full-time office staff is available to help you schedule an appointment. Just call 610-586-5640 or send an email request to boroinspects@verizon.net. That's 610-586-5640 or email at boroinspects@verizon.net.
Specially created t-shirts by BrainFlushGear.com offer the extreme sports enthusiast an opportunity to have a clothing line available that suits their sport. BrainFlushGear.com understands that when we get the moment where we can jump on our motorcycles, wave runners, surfboards, snowmobiles, or skateboards, it can be priceless. They offer custom artwork including silk screening, transfers, and embroidery. Speak to one of their consultants today and they'll help you create your own Brain Flush. Visit BrainFlushGear.com or email them at contact@BrainFlushGear.com.
For your septic inspection and testing needs, please consider Bucksmont Inspections. They've been serving the Bucks and Montgomery County areas for over 15 years. As members of the Pennsylvania Septic Management Association, the Pennsylvania Association of Sewage Enforcement Officers, and the Pennsylvania Association for Professional Soil Scientists, Bucksmont Inspections can inspect your existing septic system or test for your new septic system placement. Please call Rob Bowie at 215-669-4213 and say you heard their ad on the House Whisperers Show.
As the weather gets cooler and the temperatures drop, the bugs might slow down, but the rodents don't stop. Mice and rats begin to invade homes during the fall and winter months, looking for food, warmth, and a comfortable place to nest. Don't wait for pesky rodents to invade your home. Fight back. Have your home baited and ready for their attack with Pest Blaster. Whether preventative or a full-blown infestation, give Pest Blaster a call at 215-295-5555 and they can discuss the solution to your problem. They also offer humane animal removal services for a wide variety of wild animals, damage repairs, and cleanups. Call them today at 215-295-5555 or check them out at pestblaster.com, servicing both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Pest Blaster, 215-295-5555 or pestblaster.com for all your pest control needs.
Tri-County Inspection Company has been providing professional home inspections, commercial inspections, and historic property evaluations for over 25 years. Tri-County Inspection Company covers 13 counties, serving both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They've performed inspections for over 70,000 clients and are members of the American Society of Home Inspectors, as well as the Pennsylvania Home Inspectors Coalition. They are licensed in both Philadelphia and New Jersey. For all of your real estate transactions, call Tri-County Inspections at 215-295-2030. For their New Jersey clientele, call 856-853-4224. In PA, call 215-295-2030. In New Jersey, 856-853-4224.
Our house is a very, very, very fine house.
And we're back on the House Whisperer Show at WWDB Talk 860 with Jack Milne and Jack's special guest, Phil Getty of Boucher and James.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barry. During the commercial break, Phil and I were talking about a property I did recently in Croydon, Pennsylvania, whereby they had a fairly new above-ground oil storage tank. But when I was doing the inspection, right next to the boiler were two 3/8-inch lines that penetrated the house wall. And when I went back outside under the freshly paved asphalt was the old abandoned underground fuel storage tank. So you brought up a great point, Phil. You know, what do home inspectors look for? But, again, let's go back as to what a homeowner should do about their tank.
First thing I would do, a homeowner, even if they don't think they have a tank, is, especially the older the house, it seems like people have gone from coal to fuel oil, and now they may go to heat pump systems, is look in the basement, and if they did at one time think they had an old oil-fired furnace, look for, as you say, these often two copper tubings that are about the size of your finger. They get sticking out of the wall, and they've crimped them over, and you then you hope that they've removed the tank, but I'd go on the outside and see if you can follow that tubing underground and possibly find the old tank. There's vent pipes that may be on the side of the house, or a fill cap that's usually about 2 inches across, could be sitting in the driveway or poking up along the side of the house. And same holds true if you know you have a tank, is figure out where it is, and then I would presume, as anyone should, that these tanks are eventually going to leak and that they're eventually going to have a major problem. And therefore say I'd rather deal with it now than later, is to start to budget $3,000 roughly to get the tank pulled out and think about what to do as an alternative, either an above-ground tank for fuel oil, or consider a whole new heating system that's going to be much more cost-effective, which might be the best, perhaps, is a air heat pump unit. The other that people think about is, well, maybe I should get my tank tested, do a leak test on it. Those cost $300 to maybe $500 for a leak test, and that tells you that it's leaking or not. But I tell people when they purchase a house, they often will get the leak test done at the time of purchase, and I said, well, realize that Murphy's Law, the day after you get that leak test done, it could start leaking. So don't feel like that's comforting. In a sense, I wouldn't waste the money on a leak test. That even if it's not leaking, I'd take the same actions and say doing a leak test every year or so. I'd rather put the money towards getting that tank pulled out, because that's only going to tell you what's happening then. Sometimes people say, I'll just wait until I get water into the tank and I'll use a stick with some paste on it, or sometimes that water gets sucked up into the furnace and causes the furnace to stop. And water is one sign that the tank's leaking, but that's telling you when the water's coming into the tank. But if you've got a low water table around you, the oil's going to flow out instead. So it's only under certain circumstances that water will come in. So getting a plan set up is the first step, and then having the work done is the next. And typically the best thing to do is to yank the tank, get it pulled out, have a professional like our firm oversee the work, and document that it was done. We get too many situations where someone goes to buy a house and they were told there used to be a tank there, but they have no documents to comfort them that the tank wasn't pulled out because there was a major problem. All they've got is a slip of paper from the backhoe fellow that says no problems, and they want to see the photographs, the soil testing, the documentation that the tank was properly disposed, and that's all the type of thing that we do is make sure this is done right. There are companies out there that can either through misunderstanding or nefarious reasons, they wind up doing a lot more work than need to be done and charge a heck of a lot of money that did not have to be done, of over digging the holes and things. So we want to, if you find contamination, take the right approach and decide whether it's a small problem or it's going to run into this $100,000 direction. So removal is the best bet, but then people say, can I leave it in place? And we recommend that only when we've got it sitting underneath of a patio, or sometimes it's underneath of an addition to the house. And in that case, we'll do a leak test on it, pump it empty, and then fill it with cement or foam. But the majority of the time, 90% of the time, we pull the tanks out, get them out of sight, out of mind.
Now, doesn't there have to be a letter provided by either the EPA or the DEP that this tank had been pulled properly? And that's one thing. There's a few things as a home inspector I always want my clients to do. Number one is get the tank tested, but two, if the tank had been pulled, to get all this documentation, and you keep it with the permanent file of the home. So in 10 years from now, you want to pass that documentation along to your next buyer to make sure that this trickle of information stays with the property.
Yeah, that's you mentioned the EPA and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. That neither of those groups get involved with this because these are considered non-regulated tanks. As much as they'd like to be involved, they just could not handle the workload. So this is something that typically is the responsibility of the homeowner to do. Sometimes municipalities get involved and want to see a permit pulled when you're yanking the tank, and they come out and inspect it, or their fire marshal. But most of the time, this is something between you, and what really prompts this is when a property is sold, the next buyer says, no way, I want that tank. So almost 100% of the time, the new buyer is going to want that out. So keep that in mind, too. If you've got, the chance that you may pass on and leave this house to your children or something, you don't want to leave them with a problem to deal with. It's better to get this done. Or if you need to go get a loan, sometimes it becomes an issue, or you need to sell the house quickly, don't wait until settlement to deal with this issue. It's a lot easier to deal with it now and take it in a slow, phased approach than to have to jam everything into a short time period when you're trying to sell at closure.
Phil, if someone is interested in getting their tanks tested, what method do you suggest?
Well, I usually call call us, and I will talk with them about it. But it's a very low-pressure leak test that's done, the same as they would at a gas station. It's the same as almost blowing on the mouth of this thing. It's to simulate the pressure of a full tank. So it doesn't cause the tank to leak more or an explosion or anything like that. It's just a low-pressure leak test. But realize in New Jersey, they don't accept that leak test because there can be minute leaks at half a tablespoon a day. I think I calculated to be about 365 gallons a year. So these leak tests are not super sensitive, and no guarantee that there still isn't a small problem happening out there. And I did mention gas stations, but keep in mind that also often in the 70s especially, people were installing gas tanks in their driveway and had their own pumps out there, that you may find out that you've purchased a house and you're focused on the fuel tank, but there may be an old gas tank sitting out there underneath the drive too. So keep an eye for these vent tubes that often run up the side of a building that are typically associated with gasoline tanks.
And I think of all the old farms we have in Bucks and Montgomery counties, throughout the region, that it's easier for them to just fill up their truck right on site rather than, take the 15-minute journey into town,
That's it. Yeah, definitely an old farm.
Any suggestion as to, how they have an annual service agreement or a contract with an oil supplier as a homeowner? Do you think that it would be wise for them as to have, when they have this annual service contract met, that they dip the tank at that point?
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point. Fuel oil companies do offer a service and insurance policy. I'd have your insurance company read over that policy. Sometimes it seems too good to be true that they're guaranteeing, let's say $100,000 expense. There's also a state fund that helps out up to $4,000 when there's a leak, but that doesn't help you when you've got an $80,000 cleanup. So any offer from a fuel oil dealer to do anything, I'd check with your insurance company. And a once-a-year sticking of a tank to look for water in it, as I said, is not the right approach. It's not being proactive, and it's also only if water's flowing into the tank. It won't tell you if fuel's flowing out of the tank. So be very cautious of those policies that are offered by the fuel oil dealers. And I found, too, if they offer that, do not have them pull the tank out, because they may not look as hard as someone else to find a problem, because they know they'll be footing the bill when it does get yanked. So make sure that you'd have an independent company remove the tank when the time comes.
That's a wise comment there, Phil. Don't let the chicken or the fox in the hen house, as they say.
All right. Oh, and before I forget that most insurance companies no longer provide coverage for fuel tanks at your house. They used to years ago, but now they've seen the problems, the expenses, and you'll find if you talk with your insurance company, it's not likely they cover any of this issue.
Propane tanks. Now, I see a lot of those that are buried today.
Right. No worries with those, because propane is a liquid, but as soon as it leaks, it turns into a vapor, and it just goes up into the air. So other than the possibility of it blowing up, if you smell the propane around, but it won't cause a problem. And the propane companies usually lease, I think, those tanks to you, so they should be monitoring those. And they're a pretty thick-walled tank, also being a pressure tank. But, we don't worry about propane tanks at all. As I said, I really enjoy the challenge of answering questions. People are welcome to call me at 215-345-9400. And then we do have a web page. It's BJ, that's for Boucher and James. So BJ Engineers, which is plural, .com. And feel free to call me, especially when people are dealing with a sale of a property. It's like, who's going to pay for this? Who should deal with it? And it all depends on how agreeable the buyer or seller are to make a deal. But my bottom line here is to be proactive and deal with a $3,000 expense instead of a $100,000 and a loss of a sale of your house issue down the road.
No, that's great advice, Phil.
Jack, we're out of time, so I'll let you say your goodbyes like you always do.
Okay, well, real quick, next week's topic is skylights. Are they worth putting a hole in my roof? And as always, as it is Sunday, please spend time with friends and family. And I'll see you next week on the House Whisperer Show. And Phil, thanks again for joining us today.
It was a great time. Thank you.
And tune in again next week for another edition of the House Whisperer Show with professional home inspector Jack Milne. Now, to listen to previous programs, or if you have any questions, visit thehousewhisperershow.com.